He was just trying to get home after a long shift, until he heard the cry. A golden retriever, trapped and trembling in the cold street. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness would change everything. For him, for the dog, for a family torn apart. What happened next? No one in Nashville saw it coming. As you listen, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Make sure to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin. Jasper Cole walked alone beneath the flickering amber glow of the Nashville street lamps, his steel-toe boots thudding softly on the soaked asphalt. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the gutters into narrow rivers and soaking his worn denim jacket through to the lining. He didn't bother pulling up the hood. It had lost its shape years ago. His shoulders slouched from fatigue, the kind that seeped into your bones after working 12 hours straight at Hendricks Auto and Diesel. Jasper was 48, with the calloused hands of a man who had spent his life fixing things for everyone except himself. His dark brown beard, peppered with gray, hid the hard lines of a jaw that had rarely smiled since the accident that took his wife 10 years earlier. His eyes, deep-set and pale blue, had a quiet heaviness to them, as if they'd seen too much but never quite found the words to tell the story. He turned down Sycamore Street, just 2 blocks from his house, a small, one-story structure with peeling white paint and a stubborn porch light that only flickered on when it wanted to. That's when he heard it. A whimper. It was faint, almost drowned by the hiss of rain and the rumble of a distant freight train. Jasper froze, narrowing his eyes into the shadows ahead. The sound came again, softer, more urgent. He stepped forward and spotted a shape just ahead, half hidden beneath a rusting mailbox at the corner of a side alley. There, in the middle of the street, was a dog, a golden retriever, soaked to the bone, one paw twisted unnaturally in a rusted steel trap. Jasper swore under his breath and rushed forward. The dog, her coat darkened by rain and streaked with mud, let out a broken cry. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw something that stopped him cold. Not just pain, fear, and trust too, a desperate hope. She was about a year old, maybe 2. Her build was lean but underfed, ribs faintly visible beneath her wet fur. Her left ear had a small tear, healed without care. Her eyes were the color of honey, darkened now by suffering, but not yet extinguished. She didn't try to bite when he approached, only trembled and lowered her head, as if used to hurt. Jasper dropped to his knees, rain soaking through his jeans. He inspected the trap, homemade, cruel, clamped hard around her paw. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice deep and gravelly but gentle. "I got you." Using his toolbox, always in his truck, even when off duty, he pried the trap open with a flathead and a length of pipe. She whimpered but didn't fight. When it finally gave way, she collapsed, exhausted. Jasper wrapped her in his flannel overshirt, lifted her into his arms, and carried her toward home. From the second-story window across the street, an old man watched. Roy Ambrose had lived on Sycamore Street for 32 years. A retired Korean War veteran, he kept mostly to himself. Widowed, no children, his only routine was sitting by the window every night with a thermos of black coffee and an old binocular case that now held only photographs. His frame had withered with time, thin limbs, sunken cheeks, and eyes like gray smoke. But his mind remained sharp, especially when it came to noticing things others missed. He watched Jasper pause in front of the house, fiddle with the gate latch, then vanish inside with the limp bundle in his arms. Roy's brows drew together. "That boy," he muttered to himself, "still has a heart left in him." Inside, Jasper laid the dog on an old blanket near the heater. His house was modest, a couch with sagging cushions, a TV from the early 2000s, and stacks of car manuals lining the walls like wallpaper. The kitchen smelled faintly of motor oil and leftover chili, but it was clean, lived in, honest. He examined the dog's paw more closely. It was swollen, bleeding at the edges, but not broken. "Lucky girl," he murmured. He cleaned the wound with peroxide and wrapped it with an old t-shirt strip and duct tape. Crude, but it would hold. He brought her a shallow bowl of water and a piece of cold roast beef from the fridge. She didn't eat right away, just stared at him. Then, slowly she inched forward and licked his hand. "That's better," he whispered. He paused, then chuckled softly. "Gotta call you something, huh?" He studied her again. There was something about her, a quiet radiance, even in pain, as if she hadn't given up, even after everything. Lumina, he said, the name rising from somewhere he couldn't explain, means light. Hope you don't mind. Lumina blinked, then rested her head on his boot. The room fell quiet except for the ticking of the heater and the distant groan of a passing train. Later that night, Jasper sat alone at the kitchen table with a lukewarm beer. The rain continued outside, tapping the windows like a quiet song. His eyes drifted toward the sleeping dog, her chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Across the street, Roy closed his blinds, sipped his coffee, and murmured, "That's the second time I've seen him save something in the rain." And though neither man nor dog knew it yet, this cold, rainy night would become the beginning of something far greater than either had imagined. Morning crept slowly into Jasper's modest house. The light gray and hesitant, like it too, was unsure of its welcome. The storm had passed, leaving puddles on the cracked sidewalk and the scent of wet pavement in the air. Inside, the old space heater buzzed faintly, casting warmth into the living room, where Lumina still lay curled on the faded plaid blanket. Jasper stood in the kitchen, quietly spooning instant coffee into a chipped mug. His back ached from the long shift the night before, and his shoulders still throbbed from carrying Lumina home, but his eyes kept drifting toward her sleeping form. She hadn't made a sound all night, just the slow, even breath of a creature too tired to dream. He brought the coffee to the couch and sat down, careful not to disturb her. As the light grew stronger, he noticed more clearly what he had missed in the dimness of the night. A thin line of scars beneath her fur, barely visible now that she was dry. There were old cuts along her side, the kind that didn't come from a single accident, but from repeated cruelty. Her ears had small nicks, and one of her hind legs bore a crooked twist, like it had once been broken and healed without care. Jasper let out a low breath. "Who did this to you?" he muttered. He didn't expect an answer, but Lumina stirred slightly, and her eyes flicked open. She watched him, cautious but unafraid. He reached for the toolbox in the corner to grab his work gloves, and as the metal lid creaked open, Lumina flinched violently. She scrambled to her feet, tail tucked, body trembling. The wrench hadn't even clinked yet. Jasper froze, heart sinking. "Hey," he said softly, putting the lid back down. "It's all right. Nobody's going to hurt you here." She didn't bolt, but stood frozen, her body a tense line of panic. Jasper waited, breath held, and after a moment, she slowly lowered herself back to the floor, still watching him. He didn't say another word. Instead, he left the toolbox where it was and turned on the radio, letting an old country tune hum through the room. Lumina remained curled up, but kept her eyes open as he moved around. When he opened the refrigerator, he glanced at her again and offered a smile. "You hungry? Got some eggs and toast. You don't strike me as a cereal girl." She didn't respond, of course, but when he put down a plate of scrambled eggs on the floor beside her, she sniffed once, then began to eat. Her tail, still low, gave a slow wag. Later that morning, Jasper loaded his tool bag into the truck and looked back at Lumina, now resting peacefully in the front passenger seat, a blanket folded beneath her. The swelling in her paw had gone down, but she still walked with a limp. "I've got a job today," he said, mostly to himself. "Can't leave you here, not yet." The truck rattled to life, and they headed out of the old neighborhood toward the East Nashville, where Carla Wren waited. Carla was a woman in her mid-30s with dark curls always pulled into a bun, a determined walk, and the kind of sharp eyes that noticed everything. She worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a diner, the other as a night janitor, while raising her daughter alone. Her small white house was tidy but worn, the paint on the porch railing peeling in long strips. She greeted Jasper with a tired but grateful smile. "Thank God you're here. The ignition's acting up again, and I need the van by tonight." Her voice was warm but hurried, tinged with a constant fatigue that came from years of doing everything herself. "I'll take a look," Jasper said, tipping his cap. As he popped the hood of the old Dodge Caravan, he heard a small shuffle behind him. Turning, he saw a little girl peeking from behind the doorway. She was around 7, with soft red hair and big green eyes, dressed in a pink shirt covered in tiny, faded dinosaurs. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just watched. "That's Nora," Carla called out from the porch. "She's not much for strangers." Jasper nodded. He wasn't much for small talk either, But Lumina, resting near the front steps with her bandaged paw tucked under her, raised her head. Nora's gaze flicked to the dog. Her body tensed. Jasper watched as something shifted, just a little, in the child's posture. A hand unclenched, a foot stepped forward. Carla saw it too. She walked over and knelt beside her daughter. "You want to pet her?" Nora didn't answer, but she stepped forward slowly, cautiously, until she was near enough to kneel beside Lumina. The dog didn't move, just looked at the girl, tail twitching once. Nora reached out. Her fingers brushed the golden fur, and Lumina, gentle as a whisper, leaned her head into the small hand. Carla's breath caught. Jasper's wrench slipped from his fingers. "She doesn't usually," Carla began, then stopped. "I know," Jasper said softly. Nora didn't speak the rest of the time Jasper worked, but she stayed beside Lumina, occasionally petting her or humming softly under her breath. When Jasper was done, Carla offered to pay, but he waved it off. "You've got enough to handle," he said. Carla looked at him for a long moment, then said, "That dog, she's special." "Yeah," Jasper replied, "she really is." Driving home, Lumina rested her head on Jasper's leg. The city passed by outside, unaware of the small miracle that had taken place on a worn porch in East Nashville. That night, Jasper sat on the steps outside his house, beer in hand, while Lumina lay beside him. The moon peeked through drifting clouds, pale and indifferent. He watched the flickering porch light sputter and sighed. "You've got ghosts, don't you?" he murmured, rubbing the fur between her ears. "Well, you're not the only one." Inside, an old photograph of his wife sat crooked on the mantel. His son's baseball glove still hung on a nail in the garage. And yet, for the first time in a long while, the silence in the house didn't feel quite so heavy. From across the street, behind a curtain, Roy watched them both. The old veteran said nothing, just sipped from his thermos and nodded slowly. Some things, he thought, don't need words. From across the street, behind a curtain, Roy watched them both. The old veteran said nothing, just sipped from his thermos and nodded slowly. Some things, he thought, don't need words. But let us ask you this. Has your dog ever sensed when someone needed love the most, just like Lumina did with little Nora? Maybe there was a moment when your four-legged friend did something simple, but it meant everything. If your dog has ever surprised you with a gesture like that, comment yes down below. The morning was cool and dry, a welcome change from the storm that had soaked Nashville the day before. Jasper walked with Lumina down their quiet neighborhood street, the leash loose in his hand, though it hardly mattered. She never strayed far. The sidewalks were lined with cracked concrete, the scent of wet leaves still hanging in the air. Most of the houses were modest, aging alongside the people who lived in them. Jasper had taken the day off. Something about the way Lumina had saved him yesterday, pulling him from the edge of danger, left him unsettled. Not frightened, but thoughtful. She hadn't just reacted, she had predicted. That kind of awareness wasn't born in the streets. They passed the corner where the old sycamore tree split the sidewalk. Roy's house stood quiet across the street, blinds drawn. Jasper gave it a glance, sensing the old man was probably watching from his usual perch. Lumina walked with a slight limp, but her tail wagged gently as she took in the smells of the world around her. As they approached a construction site 2 blocks away, the calm of the morning broke. A shout rang out, a voice full of panic. "Hey! Somebody! He's gonna fall!" Jasper turned and saw a boy, maybe 7 or 8, teetering on the edge of a freshly dug hole in the street. A group of utility workers had left the site temporarily unattended, and the barrier tape had come loose. The boy had wandered in from a nearby yard, chasing a paper airplane that now lay forgotten at the edge of the pit. His feet slipped in the loose gravel. Without thinking, Jasper broke into a run, but Lumina was faster. She lunged forward, leash slipping from Jasper's hand, and dashed across the street. In a heartbeat, she reached the boy just as his balance gave out. Her teeth caught the edge of his backpack and tugged hard, enough to pull him back from the edge. He stumbled, fell on his side, but didn't go over. Jasper reached him seconds later and lifted him into his arms. "You okay, kid?" he asked, heart pounding. The boy nodded, wide-eyed. Tears gathered, but didn't fall. A woman came running from a nearby porch, face pale. "That's my son! Oh, my Lord, thank you!" Jasper waved her off. "It wasn't me." She looked at Lumina, now sitting quietly beside them, tail swishing gently, her expression calm but alert. "She's a miracle," the woman whispered. Jasper knelt and gave Lumina a long look. Yeah, he murmured, she really is. Back at home, he filled a bowl with fresh water and scrambled an egg for her. Something simple, but warm. Lumina lay on her blanket, licking her paw absent-mindedly, not the least bit aware of the life she had just saved. Jasper leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, eyes lingering on her every movement. There was something behind those golden eyes, an intelligence, a sense of purpose he couldn't quite explain. She didn't hesitate, he whispered, like she's done it before. The thought lingered until afternoon, when Jasper climbed into his truck with Lumina beside him and drove out past the city limits to the one person he knew could help him understand. Dr. Miriam Wells ran her veterinary clinic from a converted farmhouse just north of town. The gravel driveway curled past a white picket fence in need of paint, and a hand-carved sign out front read, Wells Animal Care. Wind chimes clinked gently on the porch. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedarwood and antiseptic. The waiting room was quiet, a radio playing soft bluegrass in the background. Miriam stepped out from the exam room, wiping her hands on a towel. She stood about 5'9", lean and upright, her auburn hair streaked with silver and pulled into a low braid. Her sharp features were softened by kind eyes, green, clear, and filled with calm observation. Years ago, Jasper had known her as Mim from the town potlucks, back when life still had enough room for community. But after her brother passed away, she withdrew into her work, pouring her heart into animals that couldn't leave her like people did. Well, this is a surprise, she said, a gentle smile lifting one side of her mouth. Didn't think I'd see you bringing in a dog. She kind of found me, Jasper said. Miriam crouched beside Lumina, who sat quietly, lifting her paw as if she understood this was a medical visit. Miriam examined the bandage, her movements slow and precise. She's obedient, Miriam muttered, watchful. Look how she tracks my hand. She pulled a kid away from a construction pit this morning, Jasper added. Saved him. Miriam looked up, brows raised. She's got training, therapy or service dog, maybe both. Her reactions are tuned, calm under stress, zero hesitation. She's got scars too, Jasper said. Not all from the street. Miriam nodded. I see them. Here on her ribs. Looks like she wore a harness for long periods. These small ones, around the leg, could be restraint marks. But she doesn't show fear the way most dogs with trauma do. She's focused, waiting. Waiting for what? Miriam didn't answer right away. She finished cleaning Lumina's paw and wrapped it again, tighter but careful. Then she stood and said, I think this dog used to work with people who needed her. Therapy, rehab, maybe a hospital. Someone let her go. Or threw her out, Jasper muttered. They stepped outside. Lumina walked behind them on the porch, sniffing the flower pots. I'll give you the number of someone I know, Miriam said, scribbling on a notepad. She used to train therapy animals, might recognize some behaviors, could help you trace where Lumina came from. Jasper folded the paper into his pocket. Appreciated. They stood in silence for a moment. You look better than the last time I saw you, Miriam said. He looked at her, a bit surprised. Was it that obvious? You were carrying a lot, she said simply. Still am. She gave a quiet nod, then added, but now you're not carrying it alone. As Jasper drove home, the late afternoon sun slipping behind the hills, his phone buzzed on the dash. Unknown number. He answered anyway. A beat of silence. Dad? The voice was low, unfamiliar but unforgettable. Jasper's hand tightened around the wheel. Caleb? Another pause. Yeah. It had been 3 years. 3 years since the fight, the silence, the way grief drove them apart after her funeral. I just wanted to say I'm okay, Caleb continued, in case you wondered. I always wondered, Jasper said, trying to keep his voice steady. Where are you? Out west. Things are rough. I'm working, sort of. Do you need... I'm not calling for that. The boy's voice faltered. I saw a photo. You and a dog. You looked different. Jasper closed his eyes. Maybe I am. Caleb exhaled. I don't know if I'm coming back yet. You'd be welcome. Another pause. We'll see. The line went dead. Jasper let out a slow breath. Lumina, head on his thigh, looked up at him as if she'd heard every word. I think you might have done more than save me, he whispered, and for the first time in 3 years, Jasper let the silence sit beside him, not as a punishment, but as a promise. The next morning brought a gentle breeze through Sycamore Street, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming dogwood. Jasper stood on his porch, sipping weak coffee from a dented mug, while Lumina dozed nearby on a patch of sun-warmed concrete. Her bandaged paw had improved, and she was beginning to put weight on it again, carefully, but without hesitation. Jasper looked out across the street, where Roy's curtain twitched just a hair. The old man never missed a thing. He wasn't sure why, but the night's conversation with Caleb had stirred something inside him, unsettled the quiet he had tried so hard to build. There was comfort in silence, but it was beginning to feel less like peace and more like armor. He turned his eyes back to Lumina. Her fur glowed golden in the morning light, her breathing even and calm. That dog had more impact on his life in a week than most people had in years. Later that day, Jasper drove Lumina out to Miriam's clinic. The truck rattled along the 2-lane road, passing open fields and quiet neighborhoods. Lumina rode beside him, sitting upright now, more alert than ever. Inside the clinic, Miriam was already preparing the scanning device. Her lab coat was buttoned over a navy shirt, her braid tucked neatly over one shoulder. She looked more rested than usual, though the dark circles beneath her eyes hadn't quite faded. "This won't take long," she said, running the scanner over Lumina's shoulder. After a few passes, a soft beep chimed. "She's chipped," Miriam confirmed. "Let me pull it up." She turned to the computer, typing with swift precision. Jasper waited, hands in his jacket pockets, one foot tapping the floor. "It's a non-profit," Miriam said slowly, reading from the screen. "Grace and Paws Foundation, based out of Franklin. Looks like they specialized in canine-assisted therapy for children with disabilities. Hospital visits, schools, that kind of thing." "Sounds like good work," Jasper murmured. "It was," Miriam replied, her eyes narrowing, "until it shut down last year." "What happened?" She clicked deeper into the records. There was a fire, a therapy session gone wrong. Electrical fault, maybe. No fatalities, but several kids were injured, and the organization went under not long after. They lost funding, were hit with lawsuits, and most of the dogs were scattered. Jasper's heart twisted. He looked down at Lumina, who now sat with her back straight and eyes steady. "So, she's one of them." "More than likely," Miriam said. "These dogs weren't just pets. They were partners, trained for emotional support, therapy, even mild service tasks. They weren't supposed to just vanish." "She didn't vanish," Jasper said quietly. "She was abandoned." Miriam handed him a printed page. "That's the last registered address. There's no one officially listed as her current handler. You might be able to trace her through the old staff directory, if anyone's still around." Jasper turned the paper over in his hands. "If I track them down, and they want her back, you'll have to decide," Miriam said, "whether you're willing to let her go." Jasper didn't answer. That evening after returning home, he sat out front with Lumina at his feet. The sky was pink and bruised with sunset. Across the street, the door to Roy's house creaked open. Roy Ambrose stepped out, leaning heavily on his cane. He wore a flannel jacket buttoned all the way up despite the warm air. His gait was slow but steady, and when he reached Jasper's gate, he nodded once. "Mind if I sit?" Jasper stood, unlatched the gate, and waved him in. "Be my guest." Roy eased into a wooden chair with a grunt, eyes scanning the yard before settling on Lumina. "She's loyal," he said. "The way she watches you reminds me of my old partner." "You had a dog?" Jasper asked. "Had," Roy replied. "Long time ago, back when I was stationed overseas. German Shepherd. Named him Bishop. Saved my life once during a nighttime patrol. Took a bullet meant for me." Jasper looked at him, surprised by the sudden openness. "He was a K9, Roy continued. Military trained, smart as anything. But what stuck with me wasn't the training. It was the way he knew. When I was too far gone in the head, when I'd seen too much, Bishop would just sit beside me. Wouldn't move till I came back." Jasper was quiet. "You've got that look, you know," Roy said, tilting his head. "Like someone who spent too long carrying things alone." "I lost my wife," Jasper said softly. "And my son, well, he left not long after. Blamed me. Might still." Roy nodded slowly. Pain doesn't always come with villains. Sometimes it's just, leftover love. Lumina rested her head on Jasper's boot. "She's more than a dog," Roy said. "You see it, don't you?" "I do," Jasper admitted. Roy stood, slower this time, but steady. "You keep her close. Whatever brought her to you, it wasn't an accident." As Roy shuffled back across the street, Jasper sat still for a long while. Later that night, under the kitchen light, Jasper stared again at the address Miriam had given him. The name of the foundation was printed in fading ink, the contact numbers mostly disconnected. But one line caught his eye. Dr. Lucille Harrow, former program director. He typed her name into the old desktop computer he barely used. A few articles popped up. One described the fire, a brief piece on page 10 of a local paper, no images. Another was an interview from 5 years ago, praising Grace and Paws for its groundbreaking methods in pediatric therapy. She had kind eyes in the photo, a tired smile. Jasper sat back in his chair, Lumina at his feet once again. "You belonged to someone once," he said aloud, "but I don't know if they deserved you." Lumina didn't move. "And now I have to decide if I'm the one who does." The sky was already restless by late afternoon, a heavy blanket of gray clouds rolling over the rooftops of Sycamore Street. Jasper watched from his porch as wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of ozone and damp earth. Storms weren't unusual in this part of Tennessee, but this one had a particular weight to it, like the kind that doesn't just pass, it arrives with a purpose. Lumina sensed it too. She paced more than usual that evening, ears pricking with every gust, eyes flicking toward Roy's house across the street. Jasper had learned not to question her instincts. When she became unsettled, it was best to pay attention. By sundown, the rain arrived in sweeping sheets. Thunder rolled low and steady, like distant drums. Jasper drew the curtains and turned on the old space heater, settling in with a book he wouldn't finish. Lumina lay by the door, her nose twitching, her tail still. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not wind. A dull, heavy thud, followed by silence. Lumina shot to her feet and barked, sharp and urgent. Jasper stood immediately. She was already at the door, whining low, pawing at the knob. Jasper threw on his coat, grabbed a flashlight, and followed her out into the storm. Rain pelted the ground in thick bursts, and the wind cut through his jacket like ice. But Lumina ran with purpose, crossing the street toward Roy's yard, her stride uneven but strong. Jasper's beam followed her path and landed on a motionless figure collapsed by the garden fence. "Roy!" he shouted, splashing through the mud. The old man was sprawled on his side, one hand still clutching his cane, the other buried in wet grass. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. Jasper dropped to his knees, checking for injuries. There was no blood, no sign of a fall, just sudden collapse. "Hang on, old friend," Jasper muttered. He tried to lift Roy, but the man was heavier than he looked, and dead weight in the rain was twice as hard to manage. Lumina circled, barking toward the road. Jasper looked up and saw headlights cutting through the storm. A silver Subaru skidded slightly as it turned onto Sycamore and pulled to a halt. The door swung open, and out stepped Miriam Wells, her coat flapping in the wind, her expression alarmed but focused. "I saw your lights," she said quickly, hurrying over. "Is that—" "Roy," Jasper nodded. "I think it's his heart." Miriam knelt beside the old man, her fingers checking his pulse, her movements practiced. "Weak, but there. We need to move him inside." Together they lifted Roy, Miriam at the shoulders, Jasper at the legs, and carried him into Jasper's home. Lumina led the way, tail stiff with concern. Inside, Jasper cleared the couch, and they laid Roy down, covering him with dry blankets. Miriam checked his vitals again while Jasper phoned emergency services. The storm had knocked out power lines in several parts of the city, but paramedics confirmed they were on their way. Roy stirred weakly, his lips barely moving. "Jas?" "I'm here," Jasper said, kneeling beside him. Roy's cloudy eyes flicked to Lumina, who now sat beside the couch, unmoving, ears pinned, watching over him like a sentinel. "She knew," Roy whispered, "like Bishop used to." Jasper nodded, unable to find words. Minutes later, and the paramedics arrived, two professionals in their 30s, soaked through but calm. One was Tessa, a stocky woman with dark skin and sharp eyes, her voice clipped and direct. The other was Miguel, tall and soft-spoken, with salt and pepper hair and a gentle manner. Vitals are low but stable, Miriam briefed them. Possible cardiac event. He needs a hospital bed. We've got it from here, Miguel assured her. They wheeled Roy out on a stretcher, Lumina following until the door closed. Jasper stood at the threshold, heart still racing, rain still hammering the porch roof. Miriam stayed beside him, her hand lightly brushing his arm. You did good, she said quietly. No, Jasper replied. She did. As the ambulance pulled away, a flash of light caught their eyes. Not lightning, but the sudden click of a camera shutter. On the opposite side of the street, a man with a press badge around his neck lowered a rain-covered lens and stepped forward. Sorry to intrude, he said, wiping water from his face. Name's Daniel Price, freelance photojournalist. I was covering storm damage on the south end when I saw the commotion. That moment just now, it was something. Jasper narrowed his eyes. What moment? You, holding that man, soaking wet, with the dog standing beside you. She wasn't just watching. She was shielding him. Head over his chest. Never seen anything like it. Daniel looked young, late 20s, with a lean frame, dark hair plastered to his face, and the slightly wild energy of someone chasing a story he didn't know he needed. I got one shot, he continued, holding up the camera. I won't publish without your permission, but it's powerful. Jasper glanced at Miriam, who gave a soft nod. Let him show you. Back inside, with towels drying their shoulders and Lumina curled once more on her blanket, Daniel pulled up the image on his screen. Jasper stared at it in silence. There he was, kneeling in the rain, arms around Roy, and beside him, Lumina, drenched and steady, her body angled toward the downpour, her head bowed, as if guarding the man beneath her. The streetlight behind them gave the photo an almost divine glow. She wasn't just protecting him, Daniel said. She was bearing witness. Jasper's throat tightened. He said nothing. Daniel left shortly after, promising to follow up before submitting the photo. Jasper didn't expect much, but the world, as it turned out, was watching. By the end of the week, the image had gone viral. Golden Guardian in the rain, the headlines read. Messages flooded the local clinic, and one of them came from a national nonprofit, Healing Steps, an organization that specialized in mobile therapy units pairing dogs with trauma survivors in rural and underfunded communities. They had seen the image, read the story, and wanted to speak with Jasper. The letter was formal, but warm. We believe Lumina has a gift, and we believe you do too. Would you consider joining our mobile unit, bringing light into dark places together? Jasper read it twice. Then again. Lumina, as if sensing the decision ahead, looked up from her blanket. The rain had long since passed, but the air was still heavy with grace. The days following the viral photo brought a flurry of attention Jasper never asked for. His phone rang more often, and envelopes with unfamiliar return addresses appeared in his mailbox. Neighbors waved more warmly. Strangers stopped him to ask if that was his dog in the photo. The story of Lumina shielding Roy had reached beyond their little street, beyond Nashville. But not every echo from the past is a blessing. It was late afternoon when a black SUV pulled up in front of Jasper's house, the engine purring too smoothly for the dusty road. Jasper was out front changing the brake pads on a neighbor's car, while Lumina lay beside the porch steps, eyes half-lidded but alert. She lifted her head the moment the door opened. Out stepped a man in a dark overcoat despite the heat, tall, broad-shouldered, with meticulously combed silver hair and skin too tan for someone who clearly spent more time in boardrooms than in the sun. His posture screamed wealth. So did the way he ignored the uneven sidewalk and the cracked pavement as if it were beneath him. His name was Richard Van, and Jasper knew trouble the moment the man smiled. "Mr. Cole," Van said with a smooth, rehearsed voice, "I believe you have something of mine." Jasper stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Don't know what you mean." Van's gaze dropped to Lumina. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There she is, Bella." He said the name like a possession, not a living thing. "Glad to see she's still alive." Lumina stood, her tail low, ears pinned, not in fear, but in recognition. Her body tensed. "She's not yours," Jasper said, voice flat. "I have documents that say otherwise," Van replied, pulling a thin folder from under his coat. Microchip registration, signed intake forms, transfer agreements. She was in my program. Program? Jasper scoffed. You mean the one that burned down and left kids traumatized? Van's eyes sharpened. Unfortunate accident. The courts agreed it wasn't my fault. You abandoned her, Jasper said. Threw her away. She was a tool, Van said calmly. An expensive one, yes. But when the foundation fell, so did the need for assets. Lumina growled low. I want her back, Van said simply, or I'll pursue legal action. Jasper stared at him, jaw tight. Then I'll see you in court. Van's smile returned. You'll regret that. The SUV pulled away moments later, tires hissing on the wet road. Jasper stood motionless, heart pounding, Lumina pressed against his leg. He made only one call. Miriam answered on the second ring. What happened? Jasper explained everything. By the time he finished, her voice had hardened. Come to the clinic tomorrow. I'll get the paperwork started. That night, Jasper sat at the kitchen table with Lumina resting by his feet. He stared at the letter from Healing Steps still pinned to the fridge, an invitation to do real good. And now this man wanted to drag her back into darkness. There was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a young man standing awkwardly in the glow of the porch light. He wore a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a faded hoodie that didn't quite hide the exhaustion in his eyes. Hey, he said. Jasper froze. Caleb? The boy looked older than he remembered, taller, with broader shoulders and sharper cheekbones. His hair was longer, tied back, and his jaw bore the first signs of stubble. But it was the eyes, Jasper's eyes, that gave him away. I got expelled, Caleb said. Figured if I was going to disappoint everyone, might as well come home and do it in person. Jasper stepped aside. Come in. The reunion was quiet. They didn't hug, didn't speak much. But Jasper made him a grilled cheese, and Caleb took it without complaint. Lumina circled him once, sniffed his shoes, then sat beside him like she'd known him all along. She's yours? Caleb asked, mouth full. She found me, Jasper said. They talked little that night, but Caleb didn't leave. Jasper made up the pullout in the den, and when the house went quiet, Lumina slept at the threshold between them, as if bridging something unspoken. The next day, Jasper and Miriam filed for a legal injunction, using both Lumina's current condition and Van's negligence as grounds for protective custody. The old microchip was no longer valid. The registry had been deactivated with the foundation's closure, and with the public photo and character testimonies already gaining traction, Miriam felt confident. The community's behind you, she said, handing Jasper a folder. We'll fight this. Over the next week, neighbors came forward. Roy gave a written statement. Carla, the single mother Jasper had helped, offered video of her autistic daughter interacting with Lumina. Even Daniel Price, the journalist, published an op-ed. She wasn't just a dog, she was a choice. Back home, Caleb slowly began to settle in. He wasn't talkative, but he watched Jasper more now, saw the way he spoke to Lumina, the way he treated her with a patience and gentleness the boy hadn't seen when they had last lived together. One night, Jasper found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, Lumina at his side. You mad I came back? Caleb asked. No, Jasper said, sitting beside him. I'm just glad you did. I used to think you didn't care about anything, after Mom died. Jasper stared at the darkened street. I didn't know how to care out loud anymore. That was my mistake. She's changed you, Caleb said, patting Lumina's head. I can see it. She's changed both of us. Caleb nodded slowly. Then we fight for her. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and something faintly metallic. Nerves, maybe, or the weight of too many heavy moments pressed into one space. Jasper sat stiffly at the petitioner's table, hands folded tight in front of him. His plaid shirt, ironed for the first time in months, felt too stiff around the shoulders. Next to him sat Miriam Wells, calm and composed in a dark green blazer, her braid pulled tighter than usual. Her eyes remained on the judge's bench, but Jasper knew she could sense the tension vibrating off him like static. Lumina lay at Jasper's feet, her head resting on her paws, her body perfectly still, except for the soft rise and fall of her chest. She wore no leash, just a blue bandana that Caleb had insisted she wear for luck. She hadn't barked, hadn't whined, not even once, yet her presence filled the room like sunlight breaking through a clouded window. At the opposite table sat Richard Van, his expression one of carefully restrained irritation. He wore a custom navy suit, crisp and clearly expensive, the tie perfectly centered. Next to him, a sharp-jawed attorney named Rachel Knox whispered behind a folder of notes. Rachel looked to be in her early 40s, with straight blonde hair, thin lips, and a practiced confidence that left no room for warmth. The judge, Margaret Weller, entered just as the clock struck 10. A woman in her late 60s, Judge Weller had a steely gaze, a reputation for fairness, and a low tolerance for theatrics. She wore her gray hair in a short bob and always addressed animals in her courtroom with a slight tilt of respect, as if she understood they sometimes behaved better than people did. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The hearing began with procedural statements. Rachel Knox laid out Van's claim with mechanical precision, that the golden retriever in question, formerly known as Bella, was registered property of the Grace and Paws Foundation, and therefore its assets, namely Lumina, had defaulted back to Van when the organization dissolved. Miriam responded calmly, citing microchip re-registration, Lumina's abandonment, and Van's own written testimony during the nonprofit's closure, in which he had stated that all animals used in therapy programs were to be surrendered or rehomed. Judge Weller listened without interrupting, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Then came the testimony. Carla Wren was first, her voice soft but steady, as she described how her autistic daughter had connected with Lumina in a way no other person or therapist had managed. She wore a floral dress and a nervous smile, but when she spoke of Lumina's patience and gentleness, her voice rang with conviction. Next came Roy Ambrose, escorted slowly to the front. He wore his best cap and a charcoal coat that hung a bit too loose on his frame. Despite his age and failing knees, his voice carried. "She's not just a dog," Roy said. "She's a soldier. She's a healer. And I've seen both." The crowd murmured. Jasper caught Miriam glancing toward him with something soft in her eyes. When Jasper was called, his palms sweated, but he stood tall. He spoke not of ownership, but of loyalty, of second chances, of the night Lumina pulled a child from a construction pit, of the storm where she stood guard over a man on death's door. "She didn't come into my life as a pet," he said. "She came as a stranger, but she's become family." That's when the judge raised a brow. "And your son? Is he here today?" Jasper hesitated. Caleb, seated in the third row, met his father's gaze. To Jasper's surprise, the boy stood. Caleb walked slowly to the front, shoulders squared, eyes unflinching. He wore a collared shirt, slightly wrinkled, and jeans that didn't quite fit anymore. He looked older than his 17 years, worn by whatever had driven him back to Nashville. But his voice, when he spoke, was clear. "I was angry," Caleb said, "at my dad, at the world. When my mom died, I thought everything good left with her. But then I came home, and there was this dog, this quiet, weird dog who doesn't bark at anything. And I watched her." He swallowed. "I watched her watch him. I saw him be soft with her, gentle. I hadn't seen that in years, not since Mom." He looked directly at the judge. She didn't just change him, she brought him back. A heavy silence followed. Even Rachel Knox lowered her pen. Then, as if on cue, a sound broke the stillness, a soft thud. Everyone turned. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, had wandered too far from her mother's side in the back row. She tripped over the low-carpeted divider and fell forward with a frightened yelp. Before anyone else could move, Lumina was there. She'd risen in a heartbeat, crossing the room in fluid, controlled motion. She didn't bark. She didn't leap. She simply approached the child, lowered her head, and gently nudged the girl upright with her nose. The girl clung to Lumina's neck and stopped crying almost instantly. Gasps filled the room. A few hands covered mouths. Someone sniffled. The judge stood. "Let the record show that the subject of this case just performed an act of service in full view of this courtroom." Rachel Knox muttered something under her breath. Van's expression soured. Judge Weller cleared her throat. "I've seen many disputes over animals, but rarely do they show us the truth of themselves so clearly." She tapped her gavel once. "I hereby dismiss the claim of ownership filed by Mr. Richard Van. Custody and guardianship of the animal known as Lumina will remain with Mr. Jasper Cole, with full recognition of her status as a therapeutic companion." Cheers didn't erupt, but the air shifted, like a collective sigh had been released. Outside the courthouse, Jasper and Miriam stood on the stone steps, sunlight spilling down on them like grace. Caleb lingered a few feet away, Lumina pressed against his side, tail wagging with satisfaction. "You were incredible," Miriam said, brushing a speck of dust from Jasper's collar. "So were you," he replied, then paused, watching Caleb toss a twig for Lumina on the lawn. "I don't know what's next, but I know I'm not doing it alone." Miriam smiled, soft and a little crooked. "Good," she said, "because you're not." He looked at her, eyes warm. "You know, for what it's worth, you feel like family now." She looked away just briefly, but her smile grew. "I was hoping you'd say that." The wind in late autumn had softened in Nashville. It carried with it the scent of damp leaves and the gentle hush of a town preparing for winter. Jasper stood outside the front gates of a modest white building trimmed with blue shutters and a handmade wooden sign that read, "The Lumina Home, a place to heal." The paint was still fresh and the grass hadn't fully grown in around the fence line, but to Jasper, it already looked perfect. Behind the house, the sound of children's laughter spilled into the air. Lumina darted through the yard with two boys chasing after her, their sneakers thudding over the soft dirt, one of them carrying a bright red tennis ball. She was older now, more cautious on her injured paw, but her spirit had never dimmed. The Lumina home had been Miriam's idea at first. Something whispered between them in the quiet weeks after the trial, when donations started pouring in, and people from across the state wrote to thank them for standing up for what was right. But Jasper had taken the idea and breathed life into it. He built the fence himself, spent late nights sanding floorboards, repurposed salvaged furniture into bookshelves and cubbies. Caleb had helped too, more than Jasper ever expected. Now the home welcomed children with emotional trauma, elderly residents without family, and abandoned pets that had nowhere else to go. It wasn't a large facility, just a 2-story house with 6 bedrooms, a sunroom, and a sprawling backyard, but it radiated warmth from every corner. Inside, Marla, a retired elementary teacher with a sharp mind and white curls that framed her kind face, read aloud to a group of 4 kids seated on large floor cushions. She had lost her husband to cancer and had lived alone for nearly a decade before volunteering to help at Lumina Home. Her voice was gentle but expressive, and even the most restless child leaned in when she spoke. Near the kitchen, Alonzo, a tall, soft-spoken man in his 60s, with deep laugh lines and skin darkened by years in the southern sun, stirred a pot of chili. Once a mechanic like Jasper, Alonzo had suffered a stroke and could no longer work with his hands. Now, he cooked. He joked that healing happens faster over soup, and no one dared argue. His food brought smiles as often as Lumina did. Miriam walked through the open porch doors, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Her dark green cardigan fluttered slightly in the breeze, and her braid, now streaked with more silver than auburn, rested against her back. She glanced across the yard, eyes finding Jasper easily. "You keep sneaking out to the front," she teased, her tone playful. Jasper shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. "I like seeing it from a distance. Makes me believe it's all real." She came beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It is." Behind them, Caleb exited the back door, a leash in one hand and a shepherd mix trotting beside him. Hazel, a young rescue with mismatched eyes and a stubborn streak. Caleb had taken a liking to the dog the moment she arrived. He was taller now, broader in the shoulders, his shaggy hair trimmed and face clearer. He worked part-time as a mentor for the younger kids and was even considering community college courses in animal care. "You think Hazel will ever stop eating socks?" he called out, grinning. "Doubt it," Jasper replied, "but maybe one day she'll learn to chew evenly." Caleb laughed and continued across the lawn toward the agility equipment they'd built together. Jasper watched his son with a quiet pride that didn't need words. "I never imagined this," he said to Miriam, "not even in my best days." "You imagined pieces," she replied. "You just needed help putting them together." Jasper took her hand, her fingers curled into his with ease, like they'd always belonged there. They walked around the yard together, watching as Lumina trotted back and forth, tail high, her eyes scanning for the next ball to fetch. A small girl with pigtails, Lily, 7 years old, recently placed with them after a turbulent foster situation, ran toward Lumina with a squeal of delight. The dog spun mid-stride and lowered herself to the ground, letting Lily throw herself against her fur in a joyous hug. That dog, Jasper murmured, voice thick with emotion. She saved more than just me. Miriam leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The afternoon sun broke through the trees, casting dappled golden light across the yard. From the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and chili drifted out to meet the breeze. Laughter bubbled like music. Lumina barked once, clear and bright, then took off across the grass again. Jasper squeezed Miriam's hand. "For the first time in a long time," he said, his voice low, "I feel like I'm actually living, not just surviving." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "You are." They stood in silence a while longer, watching the people and animals that had found their way to this little haven, each carrying their own scars, each slowly learning to trust again. And in the middle of it all, Lumina ran, free, strong, surrounded by love. In the quiet corners of life, through an old man's porch, a broken boy's return, a dog's gentle touch, we are reminded that healing doesn't come with loud applause. It arrives slowly, in wagging tails, open hearts, and second chances. The Lumina home may be just a house with chipped paint and mismatched chairs, but it holds something sacred. The truth that no one heals alone. That love, real love, is not loud or perfect. It's loyal, steady. It waits for you in the rain, in the hallway, or at the gate. So maybe today as you go about your routine, feeding the dog, calling a loved one, helping a neighbor, you'll remember that a small act of care can become the turning point in someone else's story. And if you have a companion like Lumina in your life, whether on 4 legs or 2, hold them close. They're not just part of your days. They might be the reason you started living again. A blessing for you. May God bless you and your loved ones with gentle reminders that you are never truly alone. May He bring healing where there is pain, light where there is darkness, and joy where hope has faded. And may you always find grace in wagging tails, open doors, and in the hearts of those who stay. If this story touched you, help us share the love. Comment below if you believe in the power of second chances. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm the heart and remind us that compassion still lives in this world. We believe in kindness, we believe in healing, and we believe that somewhere out there, someone just like Lumina is waiting to change a life.